On February 24, 2022, Russian forces launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This act shattered decades of relative peace in Europe, igniting a conflict with far-reaching consequences. The invasion was the culmination of years of simmering tensions, rooted in historical grievances and geopolitical rivalries. The war in Ukraine is not merely a regional conflict, it is a stark reminder of the fragility of peace in the 21st century. It has triggered a humanitarian crisis with millions displaced and countless lives lost. The war has also disrupted the global economy, fueling inflation and exacerbating food insecurity. Understanding the current conflict in Ukraine necessitates a journey back in time to the intertwined histories of Ukraine and Russia. Both nations trace their roots back to the medieval East Slavic civilization known as Kievan Rus, centered in present-day Kiev. Over the centuries, Ukrainian lands have been subjected to various rulers and empires, including the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Russian Empire. The 19th century witnessed the rise of Ukrainian national consciousness, met with resistance from the Russian Empire. The collapse of the Russian Empire during World War I provided a brief window of opportunity for Ukrainian independence. Despite becoming a founding member of the USSR, Ukrainian national identity persisted, often clashing with Soviet policies. The Holodomor, a man-made famine in the 1930s, resulted in the deaths of millions of Ukrainians, fueling resentment towards Moscow. Language, a fundamental element of national identity, plays a pivotal role in the Ukrainian conflict. While Ukrainian is the official language, Russian is widely spoken, particularly in eastern and southern regions. During the Soviet era, Russian was promoted as the language of prestige, while Ukrainian was marginalized. After independence in 1991, Ukraine emphasized the Ukrainian language and culture. However, the legacy of Russification continued to influence the country's social and political landscape. The issue of language has been exploited for political gain, both within Ukraine and by external actors. Russian narratives often portray Russian speakers in Ukraine as being oppressed, justifying Moscow's interference. The early 21st century witnessed pivotal events that fueled Ukraine's geopolitical tug-of-war. The 2004 Orange Revolution, triggered by a rigged presidential election, demonstrated the Ukrainian people's desire for democratic governance. The Orange Revolution marked a turning point, signaling Ukraine's desire to move closer to the West. However, it also exposed deep polarization, with pro-Russian sentiment strong in the eastern and southern regions. A decade later, the Euromaidan protests erupted in 2013, sparked by then-President Yanukovych's decision to abandon an EU association agreement. The protests faced a brutal crackdown, resulting in the deaths of over 100 protesters, and leading to Yanukovych's ouster in February 2014. The violence shocked the nation and galvanized international condemnation. Looming large over the crisis in Ukraine is NATO, a military alliance formed in 1949. Following the collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO expanded eastward, admitting several former Warsaw Pact countries. This expansion was met with suspicion by Russia, which viewed it as a direct threat to its security interests. The prospect of Ukraine joining NATO was a red line for the Kremlin, stemming from its historical experience of being invaded from the West. The events of 2014, particularly the Euromaidan protests and the annexation of Crimea by Russia, marked a significant escalation. Russia's seizure of Crimea, justified by Moscow as a response to the perceived threat posed by the Euromaidan protests, set a dangerous precedent. The annexation was followed by the Donbas War, with Russian-backed separatists launching an armed insurgency. Despite multiple attempts at a diplomatic resolution, including the Minsk agreements, the conflict in Donbas continued to simmer. In the lead-up to the 2022 invasion, Russia amassed a massive military force along Ukraine's borders, demanding security guarantees from NATO. Diplomatic efforts to de-escalate the crisis proved futile, leading to Russia's full-scale invasion on February 24, 2022. The war in Ukraine represents a watershed moment in post-Cold War history. It has shattered the illusion of a Europe whole, free, and at peace, exposing the fragility of the international order. The international community's response has been swift, With Western nations imposing unprecedented sanctions on Russia, military aid has poured into Ukraine, enabling it to mount a fierce resistance. However, the conflict has exposed the limitations of international institutions and the challenges of maintaining a rules-based order. The war in Ukraine is a global crisis with far-reaching consequences, triggering a humanitarian catastrophe and upending the global economy. As the war rages on, the world watches, hoping for a swift resolution but bracing for a protracted conflict with profound implications.